We've had Senator Rennick and Dr. Julie Sladen on this show last week talking about the alleged and possible failure of mRNA vaccines to attain the GMO licences before distribution.
Correct.
Now, that's a revelation that could have significant legal implications for the victims of vaccines, which you have been fighting for so much. Is there unfinished political business left over from COVID that the UAP wants to address? Because we've got all these overreaches of power. They're still there. The premiers still have it.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's a lot of legislation we need to fix that. We've got to make sure that those draconian abuses of freedom that we saw can never happen again. Look, we need, for example, we should have, and I was talking with Senator Babbitt today, we should have some type of legislation, human rights legislation in this country that restricts the use of police forces firing rubber bullets. Look, we saw outrageous conduct here in Australia. We saw something I thought I'd never see. What I'd expect to see, like a video from some, tin pot South American dictatorship, as we've got people fleeing and you've got police taking shots at people fleeing through a public park, shooting them in the back. Now, there should be limitations on the use of rubber bullets where there's real short-term risk of property damage, serious property damage, or serious harm or violence being done to someone else, right? That should be the limitations when accused. Highly restricted circumstances, rather than just the open slather, let's just sort of take pot shots at protesters we don't like. That's something we need to look at. We also need to do something to try and fix up, I don't know, what we can do with the borders. Remember, crossing in the border. Remember, the Constitution says the trade, commerce and intercourse not just shall be free, but our forefathers put in the words, shall be absolutely free. And yet we had Palaszczuk up there in Queensland putting like a plastic border of, those road dividers between New South Wales and Queensland, and we had the federal government sending off the military, Australian military, to help enforce some of these border restrictions. And we lost that challenge, was lost at the High Court somehow or other. So that's something that has to be addressed. We really need to make sure that we never again force people to undergo medical interventions. Now, this is the human rights treaty we've signed up to years ago. It's the Bioethics and the International Treaty on Bioethics and Human Rights. It basically says you can't force someone to undergo a medical intervention with threat of discrimination or prejudice. Now, that should be part of Australian law, but no, you can do that. That's something that needs to be addressed. There's so many problems that we've had, and we've got that free speech issue that we have to have. You've got to make sure, because a lot of these errors that happened were only allowed to be continued for a longer period in time because we had the suppression of free speech. We saw in Queensland, for example, the Queensland Premier criminalised doctors from prescribing hydroxychloroquine. And you weren't allowed to put the evidence up on Facebook, as you said, or YouTube, or even Twitter, that showed all these studies showing that hydroxychloroquine was an effective treatment, especially when combined with zinc and an antibiotic. So that error that happened wasn't able to be fixed because of the suspension of free speech. So there's so much we need to do, and we really need some of these bureaucrats that have made these decisions need to be held to account. And also it's the people that have been injured by the vaccines. There has to be done for the compensation of these people. I think that Pfizer and Moderna, what we are seeing now, any indemnity that they have obtained, so you can't sue us if anything goes wrong, I believe if there was a law case brought in Australia under our old Trade Practices Act, it's Competition and Consumer Act, which basically says if you've engaged in misleading or deceptive conduct, that contract can be voided. So It's clear to me that in obtaining those emergency use authorisations, that Pfizer and Moderna have engaged in deceptive or misleading conduct, and that should eliminate any